Okay, so this will talk a little bit about the proper planting of our woody plants, especially our trees. Shrubs are a little more forgiving, but the trees, we plant a lot of trees wrong. Start with a healthy plant. Go to the nursery. Look at your plants if at all possible. Inspect them. Look for a healthy trunk. If you can't do that, if you're having lots of things delivered, inspect them as they come off the trunk or inspect a few of them as they come off the trunk. Don't be afraid to send them back if you need to. They are sold based on the root system. I'll show you a couple of pictures of what those are. So these are bare root plants. Normally we see these mostly in the spring for fruit trees or roses. We don't usually see many other things. Sometimes large trees are sold this way when they're sold as very small trees. So young seedlings are often sold this way. This would be examples of Baldwin burlap. Baldwin burlap trees are often seen with evergreens. And this is an example of containers. Containers come in a wide variety of sizes. They're usually these black plastic ones like you see here, but they can also be wooden. And you get a great variety of sizes with containers. You do want to make sure you check your trunk for any mechanical injury, environmental injury, any animal damage. If it's got wrapping around it, unwrap the trunk. Make sure you've got a single leader. I'll show you some pictures in a second. And look for any trunk cracks. So these are all examples here of different types of damage. So this one here in the top left, that is mechanical damage. An example of a mower or some sort of other equipment that came by and injured the trunk and it was never cleaned up. This one over here in the top right is actually environmental damage. That's a frost crack. When you get freezing and thawing and the bark is thin, it can actually crack like that. And then down here on the lower right, anybody who's done any deer hunting probably recognize that. That's animal damage. You want to make sure you have a single central leader for species that require that. And most of our tree species do, not all. But what you're looking at is, does the trunk pretty much run a straight line all the way up and then the branches come off after that? And yes, there are exceptions, and there are trees that are sold as multiple stems, but you're trying to avoid things like this, where you've got this V in the center, and that's a crack that runs all the way through. You can actually see how this crack runs almost all the way to the base of the trunk. That's a tree that's never going to be very structurally sound. If you've got this wrapping, and you can get the chance to unwrap it even a little bit, yes, the wrapping helps in transport, but it's not necessary once the tree is in the ground. So if the trees are at the nursery, take the wrapping off, at least to be able to observe what the trunk looked like underneath. Part grade is something that allows cities or companies to get lots and lots of trees cheaply. They are trees that have the damage on it, so you can look and see here that this entire area has not got great bark. I can see where some wounds are there that haven't healed well, but the tree is alive. The nursery's been caring for it. They're great for cities, particularly for downtown areas or places where you need lots and lots of trees really, really cheap, so you can get them somewhat inexpensively. City trees, like downtown city trees, those trees don't normally live very long anyways. So if you can get 8 or 10 years out of them and you can spend a lot less money on them, that's not a bad deal. For residential properties, commercial properties, try to avoid getting these types of trees. This should be pretty obvious. It's not something that you have to memorize or anything like that, but it's just pretty much to show you that there are standards for tree trunk sizes that correlates to the root ball size. But it's pretty obvious that the larger the trunk is, the larger the root ball needs to be. What you really need to keep in mind is the larger the root ball is, the heavier the thing is, especially if you get them when they're wet. And you don't want to let these trees dry out, so there should be some level of moisture in there. Avoiding pot bound. So for your container trees, take them out of the container if you possibly can, especially if they're smaller plants. Look for these girdling or circling roots. Cut them off, and don't be a wimp with this. Get that hatchet, get a knife, get a hacksaw, get whatever, and just chop them right off, or get your hands in there and rip them apart. You don't need to be gentle. In fact, it's bad to be gentle in this case. Ideally, we'd like to do our planting in the springtime. You can actually plant anytime you can dig the soil, as long as you can water. Now, everybody always asks how much water. A new tree needs the equivalent of about 5 inches of rain per week for a season. Sometimes, depending upon the species, 2 seasons. So that's about a 5-gallon bucket of water every 2 to 3 days. And that's not a 5-gallon bucket of water dumped on the soil where it runs off. That's a 5-gallon bucket of water slowly dripping into the root zone every 2 to 3 days. Use an awl, put a hole in the bottom of your bucket so the water runs slowly. Set your hose on a trickle every 2 or 3 days, or you can certainly buy the Gator bags for this. Digging your proper hole. Bigger is always better and not deeper, usually wider. Right? The thing here is watch for the flare, and I'll show you that. We plant more trees too deep more often than I can possibly count. Right? Take the time to find the root flare, and that is what needs to be at the surface. The mound is there so that as you're watering and water sits and takes some time to absorb into it, the root ball isn't sitting in puddles of water. So you put a little bit of mound there, and that way the water can slowly absorb through it. This particular image shows some staking. Staking isn't always required. In fact, most of the times nowadays they recommend that you don't stake. I'm showing you here in case you have a situation where you need to stake the tree. If the area is very, very windy or on a slope, those are types of places where you might need to stake the tree. Otherwise, it's actually better for the tree and healthier for the plant if it isn't staked. These are all going to be pictures of trees that are planted too deep. So you can see the flare was a couple of inches below surface here. Here we've got the flare is about 9 inches below the surface. So that's way, way, way too deep. And these are coming out of the nursery too deep. So you do have to check them. I've not yet run into a nursery grower who wants their trees planted too deep. It just seems to be something that happens as they're moving, as they're digging, as they're repotting, and in the ball and burlap process. If you notice with this one where the yellow arrows are, those are roots that came off the trunk. Those are adventitious roots. Those are roots that are developing from tissue that wasn't originally designed to be roots. And those are not quality roots. They're not structurally sound. They're not durable. They won't hold the tree in place. Down here at the base of this tape measure, there's your structural roots. Those are the roots that need to be at the surface of the tree. It's not always just soil. Sometimes we bury them with mulch. You don't need any more than a couple of inches. No more. Just enough so that it looks good. If you look at the trunk next to that piece of plexiglass, that's another tree that was buried too deep. Look what those roots are doing. Those roots killed the tree. Mulch volcanoes. Stop this. I'm going to haunt your children if I see you doing this. Not even joking. Not joking. I will haunt your children forever. Don't do this. This former student sent me this picture. It was kind of amusing. Don't do this either. Right? This is using rocks as mulch. Don't do this. Keep your trees at ground level. These are the girdling roots that result from improper planting. There's nothing that can be done for this tree. This tree, actually, you can see the size of the trunk. It lived a fairly long time. You get 10 or 12 years, maybe 15 years out of it. And now there is nothing that you can do. And you could have prevented this. You could have had this tree living 400 or 500 years. But nope, now it's going to live 10 or 15 years because we didn't look for the flare. And then the roots started girdling the tree. As you look at this picture, just think about what's going on here. There's a lot of possibilities. I don't know what the right answer is. I found this picture online. So there's a lot of things. Could be lawnmower, could be mechanical injury, could be some combination of things. So there's lots of things that are happening here. This is a tree that probably needs to be removed. So you do have to think about that when you're looking at damage with our trees. These are some links to some YouTube videos. I'm going to see if they work. If not, I'm going to link them separately.
Where Grower Talks recently saw a 100-inch tree spade in action. Now we've sped up that action about 4 times during some of the videos, so you can see this 10-minute transplant process take place in just a few. Now this tree spade is the biggest one in Illinois, the only 100-inch tree spade in the state. The only way you can go any bigger is a 120-incher. Apparently there's only 2 of those in the country.
that's it. As always, if you have any questions, don't hesitate to get in touch.